news. New York Parrot, a New York-based national and global news outlet, is changing the narratives of media operations. We focus on the news that matters, like self-empowerment, entrepreneurship, finances, health, security, politics, and more. We strive to curb violence, racial and economic discrimination, and to promote peace and socio-economic development of multiculturally diverse world. As we give voice to the people, we also give your business a voice and make it heard. Get your product and services off the ground by advertising on our fast-growing platform. With so much of daily visits to New York Parrot, you can't afford to be invisible to prospective clients on the website they trust the most. Our posts reach millions of people across the New York State and around the world. Advertising on our new site will unlock an audience of thousands of potential customers on your doorstep. New York Parrot is born to prosperously speak tomorrow for the voiceless.
Hi, I'm CARLO PARCELLI. I'll be your host today. Dustin Pickering is on assignment. I'm here with my co-host, Billy Bob, and our guest today, all the way from Yalta in Crimea, is Regis Tremblay. And good to see you, Regis. Can you give us some more background, and then we'll launch right into some of the topics we're going to discuss today.
Good. Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure being with you. For those who are not familiar with me, I'm an American documentary filmmaker. I've been coming to Russia since 2017 and finally moved here in March of 2020, so it's going on 3 years. My focus is to try to show people, especially in America and the West, what Russians are like, what this country is like, to try to dispel the really extreme Russophobia and propaganda that's hurled at Russia on a daily basis. So that's basically a little summary of who I am.
I know today you wanted to discuss in particular the tensions between actors among the EU states, Macron and Meloni, and Orban and his position, and other aspects of that, the possible cracks in the European Union. So, how do you generally feel about the situation there?
Well, I don't think they're possible cracks. I think they're, some of them, really huge cracks. They have a lot to do with the rising energy costs. People are preparing for a very difficult winter, which is already approaching in Eastern Europe. And in Ukraine especially, temperatures are below freezing. There's snow on the ground. I'm reading today that there are 6 nations that want Russian sanctions alleviated because they're hindering the supply of food, grain, and fertilizers. And those countries are some biggies: France and England and the Netherlands. And then Spain, Belgium, and Portugal also signed on to this petition. There are also cracks in how much weaponry and ammunition and money some of these countries have to send to Ukraine. They're broke themselves. The Baltic countries, for example, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, these countries are bankrupt. All of these countries have been overwhelmed by Ukrainian refugees. They're trying to turn them away now. They've got no place to house them. They don't have the money to feed them. They don't have jobs for them. And so, on top of the Middle Eastern refugee crisis of the last 5 or 6 years, parts of Europe are ready to bust. There's also cracks in the position of the individual states within the European Union about when this thing should end and how it should end. But I think the biggest thing that I've read is some of these countries that I've already mentioned publicly are beginning to realize they are nothing more than puppets or vassals of their transatlantic master, the United States. This is the hugest crack. They're realizing, and you can read this in a variety of publications, they're basically saying the United States does not have our interest at heart, only its own. So that's my view from here on what I think is happening across the EU and in individual countries. There are a lot of people here who think that the EU is going to crumble and that the individual states will once again become sovereign, because they're not sovereign anymore. They take their orders from the United States and from these unelected officials in the EU. It will not be pretty. It'll be a form of neo-feudalism where it'll be very hard times for everybody. So that's my take on the cracks that I see in the European Union. And
I guess the European Union saw itself as exempt from the way the United States treated the rest of the world, especially the global South, and now they're getting a taste of what it's like to say be South America or Africa, for example. How they can increase their supply of fuel with the main pipeline blown up is beyond me. Do you have any take on that?
Well, yeah. Their energy prices, they had cheap gas and oil from Russia for decades. They were strategic partners. That gas and oil is the reason why Germany rose to become a manufacturing economic powerhouse. And the rest of Europe as well benefited from that. Now they're claiming that they're getting not the same, but oil and gas from the United States at 6 times the cost of Russian gas. And the EU has voted to put a cap on it. I think it's $60 a barrel, and Russia goes, no way. Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia, OPEC plus, are determining what the cost of oil is going to be and who's going to get it. And the United States is finding itself cut out. President Xi is in Saudi Arabia right now to an incredible welcome, red carpet, which all Joe Biden got was a fist bump and sent home with nothing. Really embarrassing. And so Saudi Arabia and China and Russia recently have been joining forces. That's not good news for the petrodollar. It's very bad news.
I hear someone gave Biden a T-shirt. He gave him a T-shirt. But yeah, you're right. The German reindustrialization was heavily dependent, critically dependent on cheap Russian oil. Billy Bob, you want to jump in with something?
Yeah, Regis. So I was thinking about, you were saying that in the newspapers, you're reading different articles about the European Union, finally kind of waking up and, seeing that, they're being kind of used, right? They're being asked to sacrifice to benefit the U.S. But I just don't they really know that? Isn't that what the politicians are supposed to do? I don't think we're way smarter than them. I don't think that me sitting here in my bedroom, knows way more than they do. So that's theater. It's kind of like theater, right? They're allowing this opinion to be put out there, and they have their reasons for that. But come on, they're not stupid. They know exactly what they're doing. So I mean, that's my first thought, with your framing of, hey, they're finally waking up, because I'm not sure that's true. I think they know exactly what's going on, and they're going to try and force their working class to sacrifice as much as possible. And they know that they can only push their population so far, but they're going to try and get every last bit of sacrifice out of their population that they can. And I think it's interesting. We see that, you know, it's definitely a change, right? It's a shift, and we'd like to see, you know, these true opinions being presented in the newspapers. But in reality, it's not just because it's finally dawning on them that they're being used. I don't think, but that was one thought that came to my mind as you were talking, Regis.
Well, the other thing that has to be pointed out and underscored is the political unrest across European countries. I don't know if you get news of this or see video, but massive demonstrations in places like Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, even Brussels, Spain, the massive uprisings of people, talks of strikes. So the people know what's going on, and they're not very happy. And there's a lot of people, myself included, which is why I stated, I think these unelected EU officials might not have jobs when all of this shakes out.
Well, also we had the attempted coups in Italy and Germany. What do you make of those? Are they hyped or significant in any way?
I don't think they're very significant. You know, they were put down, both of them, very quickly. You know, but what I think it points to is that there's a number of unhappy people and political parties that don't like what's happening. In Germany, there's a real opposition in their Bundestag. There are a number of politicians, conservative maybe, but pointing out that everything that Germany is doing is against its core interests. And when you look at what's happening, you have to say, well, duh.
One of my favorite things is to read the comments after articles. And I have to say that the propaganda being laid down by the Western media, European and American, is so effective. It's as if Ukraine is just rolling over Russia. It's like at the doorstep of Moscow. If you read this nonsense, and the people are swallowing it, and I think that is also sort of suppressing. It's designed to suppress protest and dissatisfaction. And do you have any take on that? I mean, you're kind of being in Yalta, being in Crimea. You might have some insights we don't have here in the U.S.
Well, I just did a show recently with Professor Glenn Deason from Southeastern Norway University. He's been on my show several times. Prolific writer, an incredible analyst.
I agree. I saw that show. It was excellent.
Yeah, he's probably one of the leading experts on Russia, Russian history, culture, and politics anywhere. He's a member of the Valdai Discussion Club. He's being invited to talk all over the world, and he's in danger of losing his job. This is something else that that governments are doing. They're really severely punishing people who speak out. I have friends, journalists that are here in Russia, who cannot go home under the fear of being arrested. Their bank accounts are already frozen. Legal proceedings are beginning against them. And this is maybe 4 or 5 people that I know personally. So in addition to the propaganda and the Russophobia, which, as you mentioned, Carlo, is 24/7, it's overwhelming. It's damn near impossible to break through. You know, when you put on top of that censorship and threats and civil action being taken against people, a lot of people are afraid to stand out and speak out. I think it's a real serious problem.
The news I read this morning was about an attempt by the EU to cobble together some kind of a judicial framework to prosecute Russian war crimes. So it's I guess the ICC isn't gonna be involved apparently, so they're gonna try and create their own framework to, you know, in perpetuity just continue this harassment of Russia. It seems is the purpose of this. So after the military conflict is ended, you're going to have this constant harassment, and so it seems like the West is looking for an excuse to just create a permanent state of conflict on our planet. A permanent state of conflict between Russia, China, and the West, and they're gonna use all their resources to try and get all the other countries, to join them in their opposition to Russia and China and Iran, Venezuela, all the other countries that are what resisting the Western full spectrum dominance, global hegemony. So, any thoughts on that, Regis? The criminal court that is going to be prosecuting Putin for war crimes. It's just a coalition of the willing.
Exactly, it's laughable. Because these war crimes they're talking about, they have no proof. There are no facts. There's no foundations. They're simply wild allegations. Most of them coming from Zelensky and some other people in Ukraine. They're coming out of the mouths of Anthony Blinken, Lloyd Austin, even Joe Biden. Russia has been gathering information and facts about war crimes committed by the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian government, the government of Zelensky, with facts. They're setting up their own tribunals. There's more than one. The separated republics of Donetsk and Lugansk have their own war crimes tribunals for crimes that have been committed against their people for 8 years now. It's genocide. And so what Putin has basically said is, you know what, America, United States, and the West, you go your own way, you do whatever you want, but we're not party to this anymore. We're going our own way. They've made that very clear. So I think this is all part of the show. It's for public consumption.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. It's interesting that next week this Alexandra Matvichuk will be given the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize. Obviously a stooge for the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, CIA Langley crowd, and she's doing it. It's interesting because she reminds me a little bit of when Obama got the Nobel Prize and then went on to launch 7 wars.
Yeah.
And become one of the premier war criminals of the last few decades. And she's sort of cut from the same cloth. It's fascinating how they just promote this nonsense. It's as though they've taken a leaf from celebrity television, and they realize how effective that is as propaganda. But
just look at Time Magazine. Just named Zelensky the Man of the Year.
Oh God!
And for those who remember, they did the same thing with Hitler. They did the same thing with Joe Stalin and other notorious figures. So yeah, this is an incredibly well-planned, well thought out plan, soft power to destabilize not only Russia, but China and really the rest of the world. And by the way, I'll make a comment about U.S. foreign policy. There's 2 or 3 basic principles. One is that capitalism must reign. And that's in the interest of, obviously, Wall Street, the military-industrial complex. And the second principle of U.S. foreign policy is to allow no other system which threatens America's interest. Communism, socialism, some hybrid thing, whatever it is China has. If you look around, that's what the United States has been doing for 400 years, eliminating any systems that are a threat to American hegemony, American power in the world. It's capitalism. It's the bottom line.
And they will utilize as proxies, ideologies that they oppose. So they'll use the extremist Wahhabists in the Middle East to overthrow nationalist, non-Wahhabist governments, that are legitimate, like, Syria, Nasser in Egypt. And then they'll use, narco death squads in Central and South America, and they'll use actual Nazis in Eastern Europe. So, you're absolutely right. Like they will destroy they'll go after and attack any ideology that doesn't benefit them, but at the same time, they will use opposing idea, and that's liberalism. So ultimately, liberalism is, when you employ actual Nazis to further your interests, how are you any different than the Nazi ideology? So, there's a very fine line between liberalism and Nazism, but right now liberalism definitely seems like it's intolerant towards any other ism, and like you said, it's going to not be satisfied until it has conquered and made everybody like itself. And so people are resisting that. Like people aren't down with the woke liberalism of the CIA, but they're pretty effective. We talked about their soft power, and their soft power, they play to their strengths. So this criminal court is going to be great for the West because they can highlight all these allegations, and they're not going to say what you just said. They're not going to say they're baseless, right? They're gonna project them into everybody's consciousness as if they're facts, and they're going to the facts that the Russians have, they're going to censor that. That's going to be Russian disinfo. And so their soft power apparatus is a huge strength, way more powerful than their actual military strength. And so while Russia might, win in the Ukrainian battlefield, I think the West's strategy is to use their soft power and to, continue this war for decades and maybe generations and just chip away and weaken Russia, China, like they did the Soviet Union. So, I think they're in it for the long haul, and they're thinking forward. But it's a reprehensible strategy. It's reprehensible, and it's predicated on the necessity, their desire for global hegemony, and that's it. And it doesn't have humanity's interests at heart. It has the interests of the Western wealthy elite, the millionaires and billionaires. I'm sorry, I'm grandstanding. I'll be quiet.
No, it's fine.
I don't know. You said it better than I could have. I just would like to add a couple of things to that, Billy Bob. President Putin repeatedly now in the last several months, once he's realized and Russia's realized that there's no chance of talking with the United States, that Russia is going to take care of this situation in Ukraine as it see fits and according to its timeline. But Russia and Putin has been speaking about this liberalism you talked about, this Western American liberalism. He called it satanic. And he, as one person, but he's not alone, there are a lot of conservative interest in Russia, including the church, the Russian Orthodox Church, that are vehemently opposed to American liberalism. They don't want it here in Russia. I'll give you a couple of really quick examples. The headlines today of this Women's National Basketball Association woman, Brittany Griner, was released in a prisoner exchange with a arms trafficker. I have to tell you, she broke the law. Russians are not tolerant of drug use, are not tolerant of drinking. Now, they all drink. I'm not saying they don't, but I'll tell you what. I've ridden in dozens and dozens and dozens of taxi cabs where when you talk to the driver, you say, do you drink? And he goes, oh, gosh, I couldn't drink on my job because even if I got stopped and they smelled it on my breath, I'd go to jail. I have some friends who have told me about marijuana use in Russia. I'm telling you, even once being caught with it or using it, you're in for a lot of trouble. So this is part of Russian culture. There are people here, Western-leaning liberals, who want all of this Western stuff, all of these American values, freedom. They want freedom. But the vast majority of Russian people don't want it. The same thing goes for LGBTQ. And people need to understand this. There's no law against homosexuality. There is a law against mixed marriage. Okay? Couples of the same sex. There is a law. And they've just passed the law that is criminalizing the propaganda of these values. And the Russian people are behind it, I have to tell you. But I also have friends who have told me nobody is being persecuted, arrested, or sent to a gulag because they are in a quiet, private relationship with somebody of the same sex. That isn't happening. But what Russia is against is the propagandizing of LGBTQ parades and demonstrations, and these drag queens going into the schools talking to kindergarten kids about sexual changes. You're not going to see that. So the point that I'm making is Putin has turned away from Western values. He keeps talking about their Christian values, Orthodox Christianity. He talks about their culture, centuries-old culture and history. It's not part of what makes up the Russian people. And I think that's important for American people to understand, although they won't listen.
Well, I think we'll take a break now and come back to that. And I'd like to also expand the topic of the kind of the dissolution of the American empire. Are we ready for the break?
If not, yeah. I can continue. It's a little early. None of us can take us to break, so we're waiting on the producer. But he can he can take us whenever he wants. But I was that's a great point, Regis, about other cultures exist and they have different values, and the West is just we're conceited enough that we think that ours are the best and we want to export them, and we denounce and we look down on other cultures for not embracing our values. And I think it's wrong-headed to assume that Putin is some kind of an illiberal homophobic fascist because of these laws, right? Like he's a reflection of the culture, and he's a politician. He's kind of constrained in his politics by the public opinion. So in a sense, the governments in Iran, the government in Russia, these governments are representative of a popular, cultural conservatism. And I think it's foolish of Westerners to want to export our culture and our liberalism to those countries, especially at the point of a gun, or canceling them and just making them enemies because they don't want to adopt our culture, our liberal culture. Now, having said that, of course, I'm socially liberal, right? I don't want people being arrested for marijuana use. I don't use marijuana, so I'm culturally conservative, but I'm socially liberal. I don't want to enforce my values on other people. But hey, if Russia wants to, well, it's their country. They have every right. They probably have good reasons. Same with China. Same with Iran. So it's folly for liberals, the working class in this country, to hate Iran and to hate Russia because they have a culture that's different and a government that reflects a different culture. Just to demonize those people and call them evil fascists and they all need to die, which happens quite a bit on social media and Facebook is misguided.
And I'm
Go ahead.
sorry.
No, I was done.
To borrow Billy Bob's cynicism, the people here that are using that as a leverage against these countries, they don't give a rat's rectum about LGBTQ rights or anything like that. If it was to their benefit to send all those people to a death camp, they would do it tomorrow. The Victoria Newlands of the world and the Anthony Blinkens of the world, they don't give a shit about these people as much as beyond their propaganda usefulness. So that's my 2 cents. But
yeah, I want to point out something. We're talking about this soft power, but also the hard power, the military incursions in other countries, this astronomical defense, I call it a war budget. It's over $1 trillion a year when you consider everything. And with the rest of the world, 85% of the world, and major powers like Russia, China, India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, countries in South America and Africa, turning away from the US dollar. This is the mill. Is it sustainable? I think this is an important thing I don't hear many people talking about. Is this sustainable? I would argue it's not. There's only really one place left where there's a big pot of gold in the United States, and that's Social Security. And they've been talking about coming after it for years. And so I think this is something important. You're talking, Billy Bob, about the United States wanting to continue this thing for as long as they can. I don't think they can. And I know that Russia can sustain this. Russia is self-sustaining now. It needs very little from the outside. It's creating trade agreements, bilateral agreements with all these countries I just mentioned, the BRICS countries, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, OPEC. The handwriting's on the wall. The dollar is over. The empire is done. We're watching it collapse. That's my feeling. I don't think the United States can continue this. I don't think they can continue it for a whole lot longer, by the way.
So MUTIU might want to take us to break. We can't go to break. He messaged me about taking a break, but I.
In a world where the quality of information available to poorer communities is doctored, tainted, and sometimes regressive, where the words fake news have come to mean other people's opinions, it is vital to rely on news platforms with journalists who have feet on the ground and can report the truth. New York Parrot, a New York-based national and global news outlet, is changing the narratives of media operations. We focus on the news that matters, like self-empowerment, entrepreneurship, finances, health, security, politics, and more. We strive to curb violence, racial and economic discrimination, and to promote peace and socio-economic development of multiculturally diverse world. As we give voice to the people, we also give your business a voice and make it heard. Get your products and services off the ground by advertising on our fast-growing platform. With so much of daily visits to New York Parrot, you can't afford to be invisible to prospective clients on the website they trust the most. Our posts reach millions of people across the New York State and around the world. Advertising on our new site will unlock an audience of thousands of potential customers on your doorstep. New York Parrot is born to prosperously speak tomorrow for the voiceless.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Regis on that. And there's a lot of indicators out there. I mean, Venezuela has recently signed an agreement, I believe, with I think it's Chevron, to work together with them in the production of oil. We have a moderate elected in Colombia. I can't remember that happening almost in my long sojourn on this planet. Lula has been reelected in Brazil. you can move over to Erdogan in Turkey, and he's making noises about allying himself with the Assad government in some kind of agreement to keep the Kurds from harassing Turkish territory. You have Orban. You have the failure to promote the Taiwanese attempt to break off from the U.S. in any kind of even rhetorical way. That has just fallen flat on its face. In the past few years, the Uyghurs have been exposed. The Hong Kong protests have been exposed. All this USAID, NED, CIA nonsense. In Ethiopia, the Tigray, the CIA-led Tigray revolt has been squelched, and there's now a peace treaty very much favorable to the existing government down there. Mali and Burkina Faso. You had a coup in Burkina Faso where the French were told, like in Mali, to just get out, just leave. You're supposed to be there for security issues in Boko Haram, and you're not providing any security. So just leave. We'd rather have the Wagner group down here. We'd rather have the Russians down here. And they're essentially saying, African countries essentially saying the same thing to AFRICOM, the U.S. security framework down there. Look, you're not providing any security. You're not in Nigeria, not in Uganda. So why don't you just get out? So there's a lot of cracks.
It really seems, and I want to turn it over to Regis, but I wanted to say one thing about the comments that he was making about the U.S. dollar collapsing, and also what CARLO was saying. It really seems that the West strategy is to have another Cold War 2.0. They were successful in the first Cold War, and they want to divide the planet, and get everybody opposed to Russia and China. The difference this time, I think, is that Russia and China aren't defeated, destroyed, bombed out, impoverished shitholes. They're both, first world or getting to first world industrialized status. China's very wealthy, and they have a lot of friends, right? So they're also going to learn from the Sino-Soviet split. That was the reason the West was so successful in Cold War 1.0, was because of the Sino-Soviet split. So I really think they're going to learn from that, and I don't think they're going to be able to survive Cold War 2.0. I don't think the West is going to survive, much less win Cold War 2.0. But yeah, let's get Regis in, because he's there on the ground in Crimea. He's probably got a much better perspective of the actual military situation that's going on the ground. And I know he wanted to talk a little bit about that. Yeah, I don't know who's in charge of the camera, but yeah, we got a beautiful image on the screen, so we can just go with that.
I mean, come on.
while we hear Regis.
Yeah, you mentioned something that's very important, Billy Bob. On the geopolitical landscape, things are moving at warp speed. We've never seen so much happen so fast in so many areas of the world. And what people are saying in other parts of the world is 85% of the people in the world are behind Russia and China and their vision for a multipolar world. Yeah. So America has already isolated itself. And I think it's very important. I try to not lose sight of what's happening geopolitically from a bird's eye view, because it's not about Ukraine. It's not about Ukraine. This is a geopolitical epic battle for control of this planet, which, Billy Bob, you've been saying, and CARLO yourself. Now, I want to switch, if you don't mind, to what's really going on in Ukraine. Ukraine is not winning. The Ukrainian army has all but been defeated. There are, who knows, 10, 20,000 paid mercenaries, some of them terrorist groups that are fighting in Ukraine. They're the ones with this new high-tech equipment that can reach far into the Russian mainland. These are not Ukrainian troops. Now, people would say, you don't know what you're talking about, okay? I'm not going to talk about how many people have been killed on either side. Russia does not reveal at all. We get only glimpses of what's happened in Ukraine, but many reputable sources believe the Ukrainians have lost over 100,000 dead and maybe as many wounded. Now, I want people to remember what happened after the U.S. MI6 blew up the pipelines, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. After MI6, and for sure the CIA was involved in this, blowing up one section of the bridge connecting Crimea with the Russian mainland. Ever since that time, Russia has 24/7 been sending precision-guided missiles day and night, destroying Ukrainian infrastructure. Now, I was reading today, Vitaly Klitschko, he's the mayor of Kiev. He told the people the situation this winter will be apocalyptic. Apocalyptic. He said, don't panic, but maybe you should be thinking about leaving the country. And Zelensky, that despicable comedian puppet, pictured him today on the news over here, in the print media, telling the Ukrainian people to get used to it. Get used to what? No electricity. As much as 80 or 90% of the electrical grid has been destroyed by precision-guided missiles. What does that mean? Well, you don't have light, you don't have water, sewage can't be pumped, and you don't have heat. And Zelensky today, with that shaggy-looking, probably cocaine-infused stupor that is always part of him, is telling the Ukrainian people to get used to it. How can anybody, anywhere, think that that spells victory? What we're talking about really is not a failed state. We're talking about a major humanitarian catastrophic wasteland. And I have to tell you this, with these strikes that have been fired deep into Russian territory with minimal damage, but their effect was propaganda, political. They've had no effect on what's happening. But I have to tell you this, Russia knows who's behind it. And if these people in Washington and the UK and wherever else they're from push Russia too far, it's game over. Russia, if it wanted, could turn Ukraine into a wasteland with a scorched earth assault, missiles, artillery, and I want to remind people, 300,000 freshly trained troops are approaching the front line, a 1,000-kilometer front line, and another 20,000 volunteers. Many of these, from what I hear, may be mercenaries, but veterans who served in previous conflicts. That's 320,000 men. Can anybody who can think logically believe that this is going to be defensive? That Russia just going to draw this line and protect itself? I think you got to be crazy. Putin said two main things: complete destruction of the Ukrainian army. That now includes NATO forces that are there, that includes mercenaries. He's not going to stop until that happens. Number two, this is the big thing, and Putin just said it recently. It may take a longer time denacifying Ukraine. And what does that mean? That means going all the way to Kiev and Lvov and the Polish border to clean out that evil ideology. I don't know if your guests know or you've covered this, but there's been people covering it now. They have been indoctrinating children in schools with textbooks and in camps, teaching them how to kill Russians. Okay? when you do this, and you've done it to generations, really since Stefan Bandera in World War II, and now in the classrooms, you've got a poison that I don't know how you eradicate that. So Russia, to complete the job of the special military operation, has got to complete both of those primary goals of the special military occupation.
Well, that brings it. You're right about the indoctrination of children, and I've seen footage of it. It brings up the question of is Russia preparing for a kind of blitz, a major invasion, or are they going to just continue to grind down the Ukrainian forces like we hear they're doing in the Bakhmut region? Which do you think is going to be the chosen way of going about this?
Well, I wish I could get in the minds of President Putin and the people who are making these decisions, but when you look at that many troops, 320,000 freshly trained, well armed, and well clothed for the winter, I don't think they're just going to spend time sitting on the border and sleeping in their tents and drinking hot chocolate. What will Russia do? Let's look at what Russia's been doing. Number one, air superiority, missiles and aircraft bombing daily, day and night, since October, whatever it was, 24th. Russia has been grinding down what's left in various pockets in Ukraine that the Ukrainian military or the mercenaries have taken back. So they'll grind these down with artillery. This has been Russia's strategy: just bomb the hell out of them with artillery and with air bombardment, precision-guided missiles. And then once you've ground them down, you come in with an all-out blitzkrieg and you clean it up. I think that's how it's going to unfold. And, a lot of people, it's going to last for decades. My thinking right now is this could end by Russian Christmas on January 6th.
Yeah,
one more thing I want to mention. Excuse me, Billy. The other thing that Putin has said repeatedly, Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, and the Russian military strategy people, they want to not risk any more Russian lives. And so they're not going to do anything, whatever they choose to do. That will be a major priority to reduce the number of Russian deaths and injured.
I agree with that. And for that reason, their approach might be a little more conservative, and they're kind of going to rely on the winter elements. They're going to rely on nature to do some of their work for them. And I think that's part of the reason why, they're going after the electrical grids and things like that. What other issues on the ground militarily are going on? You mentioned going into Lvov and things like that. Poland, I think, has kind of some hope that maybe as a result of this conflict, they can, maybe increase their border and take some of these historic Polish cities, and that Russia might be okay with that. I know, Scott Ritter has said that that's very likely, and Russia might just be fine with that. The alternative to that would have a Ukraine there, a rump state Ukraine that is not has no access to the sea. But if it collapses, definitely Poland would come in and help themselves to whatever they could grab. Any thoughts on that, Regis, or anything else you would like to discuss?
Yeah, in terms of how Ukraine is going to be carved up, I've been reading 2 or 3 different scenarios. I don't think Russia is going to allow Ukraine to be carved up. I'll say two things. The Russians and Putin has consistently said, we are Slavic brothers and sisters for centuries. He does not want that. He wants neutrality. It's a peaceful and good relationship with Ukraine. And Russia has already shown that it is rebuilding entire cities, schools, hospitals, apartment buildings. Russia will continue to do that, and most probably with the help of some place like China, who have incredible engineers who have been building bridges and dams and infrastructure in Africa. I wouldn't be surprised if China came in and either did it for free or gave them a really long range, debt. The other thing I want to say about going into Kiev, I don't think Russia's going to have to go in and invade Kiev, and I don't think it's going to be street fighting. When Zelensky and Klitschko told the people it's apocalyptic, maybe you should think about the country. This is pretty dire, don't you think? I think it pretty much says there isn't going to be any fighting out there in the western part, and I really don't think that Russia is going to let Poland come in and grab that western part. That doesn't solve Russia's security needs, pan-European security needs, when you got Poland, which has got missiles, and U.S. bases there.
Yeah.
Russia's not going to stand for that.
What about Moldova and Transnistria? Do you think, the likelihood of Russia just connecting the land bridge along the southern border to Moldova and just having, making sure that Transnistria is then connected to actual Russian territory? I mean, is that an inevitability? I think Medvedev has hinted at that in Telegram posts.
I think Russia is going to make sure that what it wants is peace.
Yeah.
What it wants is good relations with all of its neighbors. I think that's going to be impossible with the Baltic states. They're too far off the cliff. They're in free fall right now as well. So I do think that Russia is going to want to create a safe and peaceful Ukraine. I think Russia will rebuild it with the help of China and other countries. India certainly is capable. And I think that's, in my opinion, how this is going to play out. And I know that it's not a popular opinion, but it's how I see it, sitting here and looking at it and listening to what Putin says and Russia is doing.
So it'll be a Russian-friendly government as opposed to the Western-friendly government that we have now in Ukraine.
That's what I think.
That would be optimal.
Yeah, I think there's going to be an insurgency, a CIA-backed insurgency. The question of whether Russia is going to retake the land, retake Kherson City and the Kherson region, go on to Mykolaiv, then to Odessa, then to Transnistria. That for me is up for grabs. But I do think whatever Russia does, ultimately there'll be a long-standing insurgency, using the Ukrainian Nazis as the muscle, and I think that'll be kind of ugly.
Well, that's why they're training all the kids now, right? That's why they have the Nazi camps for the Ukrainian kids. They're preparing for a future insurgency.
Yeah, well, I was just at a conference, two conferences, as a matter of fact, one in Moscow last month and one just last week here in Yalta. And the topics, the really hot topics, were what to do about opposing and dealing with imperialism and this Nazi ideology. The Russian elite or the Russian educated people are focusing on those issues. They realize that it is the United States and its vassals, which is an imperial power, using Nazis as they have since the end of World War II. There are Nazi groups all over Europe. There are, I read somewhere like 200 or 300 official declared Nazi groups in the United States that are on an FBI list. And it's very well known. Well, it's becoming well known that there's been a Ukrainian, Western Ukrainian migration to Canada. They're installed in all levels of government. Krista Freeland is the deputy prime minister. Her father was a Nazi. She's spoken in favor of Ukraine and the Nazis. And so what people at these conferences that I attended are saying is, this isn't just in Ukraine. This is global. And how is the global community going to deal with that? These are some of the questions that people at these higher levels are talking about.
Well, the U.S. just loves its Nazis because, as we've discussed on this show, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, who are based very close to where Scott Ritter lives in upstate New York and Albany, have been around since World War II, and that you also and I became aware of them back in the early 1980s because they were heavily backing Ronald Reagan's presidential election, and I was doing a TV show at the time, and I began reading about these migrant Ukrainian Nazis in the Covert Action Information Bulletin, a magazine at the time led by Philip Agee and Lou Wolf. And also you have the Reinhard Gehlen spy network, which was all made up of Nazis that Allen Dulles used to spy on and destabilize the Soviet Union. So the U.S. has loved its Nazis for a long time. So when the American public, in their virtue signaling, embraces Nazi Germany, Nazi Ukraine, I'm not surprised they can't tell the difference. They can't tell the Nazi from their neighbor. When you go to the grocery store in parts of New Jersey or New York, you're probably standing in line with somebody who killed 10,000 Jews. That's how fucked up this country is.
Well, yeah, the hypocrisy is overwhelming because
unbelievable.
The ruling class is unprincipled, right? They don't have principles. They care about their own power,
right?
And they're happy to use Nazis. They've used Nazis all the while. They're putting out this, LGBTQ tolerance thing, but at the same time they're funding Nazis and employing Nazis. So the hypocrisy is overwhelming. And again, they don't have any principles. They don't have an ideology. They'll use whatever tools at their disposal to further their economic and political interests, essentially.
Let's let Regis have the last word.
Regis, please take the last word.
Well, I would just want to say that the U.S. propaganda campaign has won. And there's no doubt about it. It's been well planned for decades and decades. And I think that Russia, admittedly, is not even in the InfoWars. They're becoming more aware of disinformation and lies and propaganda, but really have not developed a strategy to combat that. And that is what's winning in the West and in the United States. The propaganda war, hands down, the United States has won.
Well, hopefully when Ukraine is defeated, that'll turn some heads.
Well, if people only knew that it is already defeated, as I've said, and I've been arguing this now for a couple of weeks, it's defeated. I think Zelensky, he's hanging on for dear life. this is not just a failed state. This is a completely defeated country. And I include, it's a defeat for the United States and NATO. What we're going to see is Saigon, deja vu, helicopter leaving the roof of the U.S. Embassy. We're going to see that evacuation from Afghanistan last year. We're going to see and be reminded of the United States failure in Iraq and Syria. We're seeing signs of that already. So I think the empire is in free fall and the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
Thank you for leaving us with that truth, Regis. Thanks for coming on our show.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
Very
I really.
much. Take care.
Yep. Thanks for watching, everybody. Regis is great. Check out Regis's own program. He has his own podcast. He has great guests. He even had me and Carlo on once. If the producer wants to go ahead and wrap it up, we will wait patiently. Anything else? While any other final thoughts?
I have one.
Please.
The mayor of Kiev and Zelensky, Klitschko and Zelensky are at loggerheads, and Klitschko's a 6'5" boxer, and Zelensky's a 5'4" asshole, and maybe Klitschko will solve our problem by one punching Zelensky into another planetary orbit.
No, that's interesting because Victoria Nuland, of course, was saying, no, Klitschko's not ready for prime time. I think Klitschko had aspirations to be, the president of Ukraine. But the U.S. State Department said no. So maybe there's some rivalry there. It's very interesting. I'm not sure why we're still talking, but I don't mind the discussion.
Nah.
But no, I didn't realize there was any sort of conflict there. That's interesting to hear from you, Carlo.
Oh yeah. Zelensky.
Keep watching The Politics every Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time on New York.
Do you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for...
Well, that wasn't the smoothest show ever, but I think we did okay.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, as far as the Klitschko...
Do you